Hold up. Before we start today's video, let's get a very important detail out of the way. This is a router, not a router, a router. And I know different countries, different places all around the world are going to pronounce it differently. And I know there are some Americans that are going to watch this video and absolutely lose it over my pronunciation of this router. But listen, hear me out. We gave you John Oliver. We gave you Tea and Crumpet. Hell, we gave you Mr. Bean. So just let me have this, okay? I don't want to be all we invented the language, because apparently we didn't, but just let me have this. This is a router, and today we are going to review the Synology WRX560 Router. Okay, so that introduction probably got rid of about 90% of you, but the 8 or 9 of us that are left, let's talk about this. The Synology WRX560 Router, the latest release from Synology to their ever-evolving range of SRM-powered router solutions. This is a Wi-Fi 6 router designed, as I understand it, to act as the follow-up to the RT2600AC, released quite a few years ago. Now, it's worth highlighting that despite it is being seen as the refresh in their portfolio and the next step up for the RT2600, arguably it is a very unconventional design in terms of how it looks. Indeed, later on when we do get a closer look at it, do stay tuned for that, because if you were used to the thing with lots of antennas, this is going to change your mind a little bit there. Now, it arrives with a quad-core Qualcomm processor inside. It also arrives with half a gig of DDR4 memory. There's USB support. It's also dual band on there as well, so 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, not a tri-band like the 6600, another router that we are going to be referencing a lot in this video. And along with that architecture, there is support of course, Wi-Fi 6, the larger bandwidth connection there, with on the 5 gigahertz band supporting up to 2,400 megabits per second, and on the 2.4 gigahertz band 600 megabits per second. So basically 240 and 60 megabytes per second there. And again, depending on the architecture of the system you're using, most conventional users using Wi-Fi 6 are going to be connected on 1.2 gigabits per second there. But there are ways and means to improve that and take advantage of the bandwidth a little bit more. But another thing this system has is support of 5.9 gigahertz band. Now, what that is, frequency band, you're going to hear these sort of things a lot in the video, is the radio channels that are available around any kind of radio signal and frequencies. They're broken down into lots of different subcategories, and some of them are reserved. Some of them are reserved for the military, some of them are reserved for standard services, some of them for entertainment purposes, but one of them is transport based, and that is the 5.9 gigahertz band. That is slowly but surely being opened up, and there aren't a lot of routers in the market at all that arrive with support with it, and this is one of them. And what that means is it adds a larger range of high dense 160 megahertz connections between connected users on Wi-Fi 6 and the router. So the total number of active users simultaneously, they can have more bandwidth to play with between them. And depending on the frequency they're connecting with, over 20, 40, 80 or 160, this extra space that 5.9 gigahertz brings to the party means that this router, despite its rather modest stature, and only being the dual band compared to the tri-band of the other router, which is also 5.9 gigahertz by the way, supported, it means that this router is particularly high bandwidth for its scale. Now, let's before we go any further, let's unbox it. This is our retail box from Synology. We've kind of gone down this road before. It's brown box design. It's got the label there on the front, but there's lots of kind of very brand specific bits of text and writing there on the back, which show that it is actually made for this product. Will it have the corrugated innards inside like all routers have? No. That is a nice presentation. Fair play. That is pretty slick looking. Before we get into the unit itself, which one assumes is in that box, we can have a little look on the side. We have a Cat5e cable, and that looks like a standard 1 meter Cat5 cable there, but it is rubber covered there at the top. It's got a sturdy little cable there. Also, we have got our PSU. And again, that's an external PSU there. I believe it's a 36 watt. Let's double check. No, it's a 30 watt external PSU there. Nice and straightforward. And it's also clip designed. So again, if you are in different regions, you're going to need that. But of course, they've only included the UK clip for me there, so do bear that in mind there. So that's really it for the box. So let's have a look inside. What else do we get? We have the unit itself that we're going to look at in just a moment, and we've got our quick start guide there for setting the device up for the first time. Bear in mind that this device is designed to work as either your primary router with your internet connection going straight in, but you will have to rely on having some kind of CAT connection in it, RJ45 based, or you're going to be utilizing this system in conjunction with an existing router or modem from maybe your ISP there, and that means you'll be able to take advantage of a CAT Ethernet cable between the two of them. But for now, let's pop that to one side and have a little look at our router. So straight away, that is not what I expected to see in terms of its density. It's actually a little thicker than I thought it would be. Let's bring that slightly closer to camera there for us. But right now, let's get that thumbnail sorted. Thanks for your patience. Gotta say, that is bigger than I anticipated there. I know it's got a 2x2 and 4x4 antenna array inside there, spread on the inside. There's no external antenna on here. There isn't even like an external connector there. It's all inside. And if we look at that compared to the mesh router from a few years ago, the MR2200, this is a Wi-Fi 5 router. Look at the size of this and the depth of this. Look at the size of these two side by side. It's absolutely huge there. Again, the density there, there's a lot more gubbins inside this, a much more powerful Qualcomm processor there, but also a lot more handling and those antennae being separated. And certainly relying on passive calling has meant that it's had to really spread its internal hardware out quite substantially there. So another thing about the design, I've got to say, and it's the first thing that occurred to me when I saw it on my original kind of preview article on this, it looks like the Stormtrooper helmets from the new generation Star Wars films. It just does. Hopefully on screen you've got the comparison there. But it super does. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they just look like they've definitely gone a more aggressive design there in terms of how these devices look. To put that into perspective, here is the RT6600, currently the most powerful Synology router in the market right now. And just looking at the sheer scale of it, like aesthetic wise, it does look like they've gone a slightly different direction. When you look at these three side by side, this thing here has definitely altered it. They've still got that curved loop side area at the front, but you can definitely see they've gone for something a little bit more aggressive there. Also, there's no wall mounting kit on this. This is very much a desktop operation device here. There isn't the means to wall mount it. Now, you weren't able to wall mount the MR2200, but you can wall mount this one. So I'm curious about the deployment of this because it's not been designed primarily as a mesh point. We can see that there, that in its design, it's very much a desktop device. Now, that means that this is almost certainly going to be possible to use as your primary router quite well. Indeed, it does support mesh systems. All of the recent generation of Synology routers that have arrived all supported mesh within their own systems. However, the mesh relationship between all the devices is that the most powerful device has to be the primary one. So on this table, if you have these devices, if you tried to mesh them, this has to be the primary router. You can't change that order. Now, most users won't really be dicking around with that anyway, but I think there are users out there that may not be a tremendous fan of this, the way the distribution of it, and particularly when it comes to how the units are deployed, when maybe you would rather choose another device. Now, the more powerful device, not just in terms of CPU, of course, we can also refer to the backhaul and having that extra 5 gigahertz band that this does. That's a ridiculously fast second, I think it's the second 5 gigahertz connection on the 6600. It makes a lot of sense why that would be the primary. But when it comes to these two, this being the primary, it still feels to me like a mesh router with bells and whistles. It just happens to be a lot thicker. So now let's look at that design. So as mentioned, we've got all that ventilation there on the front, and on the rear of the device, we've got our ports and connections. Now, if we bring that there, you may be very familiar with that layout of connections. Why is that? Well, shockaroo, it's pretty much the same as this one here. And by that, what I mean is the system has a gigabit WAN port there. So again, you can feed in up to a 109 megabits per second, or again, a 1000 megabits connection on that port there. and that's one you're going to use for your ISP. But if the internet going into your home or business is greater than gigabit connectivity, there is our secondary WAN/LAN port, which is also 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. That's right. This router allows you to port in a 250 megabytes per second plus data connection there. So very, very handy indeed. Now, it is only that port. The rest of the remaining dedicated LAN ports there are 1 GBE. Now, we raised this in our previous review when we were talking about the 6600 there. The reason being that having that port there to be utilized for your internet connection is all fair and well, but what if you have another device at 2.5 GBE? What if you wanted to plug in a NAS that maybe had a 10 gigabit Ethernet copper port, but you still want to get at least 250, 270 megs out of it, or you have more than one device, you wanted to connect a NAS system that's 2.5 GBE, you're going to be bottlenecked to any other connected device. Now, there is a counter argument against that, of course, that if you had a NAS plugged into this device on that 2.5 GBE port and it had support of 2.5 GBE to start with, then that means more total bandwidth to be shared by all of these users. It ultimately gives them 75 megabytes per second, give or take, each, between 50 and 75, whereas previously they would have had to share a 100 megs connection between multiple users and that NAS. So there's arguments back and forth, but I do still think it's a little odd there's only one port there for 2.5 GBE. I thought at the very least we would have seen the WAN by default be 2.5 GBE and then one 2.5 GBE port. Just two of them would have made all the difference for a lot of users out there. But still, nonetheless, you've got support things like auto failover, so you can have multiple internet connections going into this, either both via the LAN or one via a LAN and one via a SIM supported or LTE supported data connection via a mobile phone or supported dongle. Fair play, there isn't a lot of supported dongles, but there are quite a lot of supported phones you can run into this device. If we look at the side, there's nothing on that side there. On that side here, we've got three things. We've got our WPS button, so again, you've got your auto, authentication and connect there on the side. You've also got Wi-Fi on and off, which, given the way this is built, you're never going to turn it off. It'd be weird if you did. And I should also highlight that the three LEDs on the front, you can disable those if you want, if they're getting super irritating with the blinky lights. And lastly, there is a USB 3.2 Gen 1 port there. It's a 5 gigabits per second port that you can attach a USB drive on there. Now, I talked about this in my review of SRM and in the review of that router, that USB support on these routers is the best it's ever been on any router I've ever used, hands down. SRM we're going to get into later in the video. We're going to do the software half of the video in a bit. But USB support on this device, in terms of storage, is unparalleled. And you would expect that from a brand that is predominantly associated with network attached storage. Therefore, a lot of that experience, and indeed a lot of the applications and client apps too, work with this device with a USB storage drive. And again, there's multiple apps to be utilized internally, from multimedia to backup applications, CMS and database applications too, can all be installed on this system. And with utilization of that USB, the result is you've got a lot of NAS type functionality with this router device. Now, in terms of encryption and security, it goes all the way up to WPA3 Enterprise, but there's many different variants of encryption and security protocol supported by this device. It's obviously backwards compatible with Wi-Fi 5 and et cetera before it, but it's predominantly designed to work in a Wi-Fi 6 environment. Now, in terms of design, as mentioned, I like it. I think it's a different look for a lot of their solutions. It feels a lot more rugged as well, I've got to say that. But I think the real thing we want to talk about now is SRM on this device, because Synology Router Manager, I'm still absolutely one of the biggest fans of, and I think it would be remiss not to at least look at just how SRM runs on this router alongside the features and the functionality for those of you that aren't familiar with SRM, to really get an understanding as to why the price tag that this has, which again is around the 200 nicker mark, it has to be said, it's not the cheapest router, why a lot of that money you're spending is for that software. Let's go onto the software. Okay, so I've set the device up and I'm ready to walk you through SRM on the WRX560. Before we go any further, it's worth highlighting, I know I touched on this earlier on, but I have done an enormous review of SRM 1.3 already, nearly an hour long. It was utilising the RT6600AX, and I go into significantly more detail on what the software is capable of and more in that video. I've linked that video in the description, and alongside that you can head over to NAS Compares, where there is our enormous review of SRM, and you can skip ahead to all the different chapters that suit your needs in that review. So although I am going to kind of skim over the software a little bit in the review here of the 560, if you want to know the full extent to what this software is capable of, do check out the links in the description to those. But let's log in here. This is the user interface you'll access via your web browser there. This is accessing the device over the LAN, but you can use Quick Connect to access it remotely. And I'm just going to sort of skim over a lot of the features, focus on some of the real high points with this device. But straight away, if we go into the control panel right there, you can see that by default the admin account is deactivated. I've created a secondary user account there. And again, we've got lots of things like the storage, and I'm going to touch on that later on because there is something that I do want to talk about there with the storage, not just what I mentioned earlier on with the ports, and a lot of kind of configuration options that those of you that have ever used the Synology NAS will be pretty familiar with. And a lot of this file server stuff is traditionally what you're going to be utilizing in conjunction with a USB drive, which I'm really looking forward to showing you guys later on. And again, you can enable these and that will create that remote access point for you there. The same thing goes if you want to be a Mac user there and you want to set up that USB storage but connected to the router with your system locally. It gives you a nice, easy, straightforward way to do that, even giving you those copy links as you need there. I'm not going to go ahead. Let's reset those real quick. And then you've got the added services there, and the number of services that are disabled by default. You'll be pleased to hear that a lot of the, let's just say, slightly more tricksy ones have been disabled there in favour of keeping the device as watertight on day one as possible. And down the bottom you can kind of play with your notifications there, how you find out about connections. And this doesn't relate, by the way, too much to when we later on talk about safe access, but if you want to attach kind of remote access credentials and remote access notifications for if and when maybe team members, family members or whatever are doing things that safe access suggest they shouldn't be doing, then you're going to need to go through some of these options to set it up there. Again, you can see there a lot more about it. We can see a little bit more on that quad-core Qualcomm CPU that we're dealing with there, with a half a gig of memory, running that SRM 1.3.1, and that's really it. If you want to set up remote access, you've got to shoot over there. If you want to customize the user interface, and that's the primary user interface, by the way, you can create a secondary guest network with its own login screen as well. You'll find out more about that if you head into that video I mentioned earlier on. But it's all fairly accessible there, all lovely, easy stuff. Lots of things you can stay on top of, have the system update its primary software, as well as databases if you choose, automatically or manually if you choose. I, of course, would recommend doing that manually there as well. Recommend doing that automatically, I should say, as well as obviously being able to back up that configuration when you want to move between devices. And if you are going to take advantage of upgrading some of the systems in your network, make sure you take advantage of that backup and restoration tool there. So what about network management? Well, that kind of breaks down into three separate areas there. The first thing we're going to look at is LAN. So LAN connections there. There have been improvements in SRM 1.3 when it was rolled out in summer of 2022, or spring really, in some devices like that new 6600. And again, there's a lot you can be getting on with. So for example, you've got that remote access, you've got the internet access, I should say there. And you get, if you have added some of the VPN tools that are available in the package center, then some of those can be configured there. I've installed some of the applications, as you can see there. And there are other apps available to download and install. If, as mentioned earlier on, you want to attach a mobile device like I've done there, and now I've got a secondary internet connection going into this router device. Again, with regards to that video I recommended there, another video I would recommend you check out is this one here, as this video also includes me providing some experimentation that I did with the router with regards to failover, showing some of the internet connection speeds over Wi-Fi 6 on these devices, as well as some of that auto failover taking place there. So again, I recommend you check that out. But as you can see there, because we've now attached a secondary internet connection, we can have the WAN internet, which I've got going in there, and then if we choose, select that mobile internet connection there, and then straight away click apply, and now we've created that failover internet connection. So if we lose the WAN connection, then that mobile internet connection will jump in there. Very, very good, lovely and handy there. But again, we're just going to head out of that. And later on, you may see a notification when we switch to the USB port. But for now, talk a little bit more about configuration and controls. Despite its incredible user-friendly nature, this software, and the fact that it's far more graphical and kind of desktop OS-based, there are just some things like firewall configurations, port forwarding and stuff like that, which are just always going to be a little bit more complex. And although they have provided a few little tidbits and little helping hands along the way, it's still very difficult to make something like this in any way kind of really novice, naive. I think at that point, unfortunately, no amount of intuitive, user-friendly software is going to help you out. But it's nice to have all of those option configuration where you would expect them to be. Now, with the local network connections, if anything's connected to those network ports, as you can see there, they will be listed here. And if you choose, you can go ahead and create those virtual networks if you choose to create those own subnetworks. So if we call this VN1, give it its own identity if we choose to. From there, we can go ahead and physically assign that to an individual port if we choose. So if you're going to attach a switch to one of the ports on this router and then create that subnetwork, you can. From there, you can also create its own individual SSIDs, its own wireless internet connection, wireless network connection associated with just this network if you choose to, very, very quickly. So we're just going to call this one virtual network Wi-Fi 1. We're not going to give it a password. Or actually, no, it looks like we have to. So I'm just going to go ahead and give that the password. And then boom, we've now created that new virtual network with its own identifiable virtual LAN there, which we could, if we chose to, assign physically to one of the ports. It's that straightforward to create those VLANs. And again, this is probably handled a little bit more intuitively and user-friendly than most of the routers that I've reviewed on the channel. And again, you can do those dedicated ports where certain priority high bandwidth services can be locked to certain ports with priority. And there's lots of little bits and bobs that you can configure for your network there. Now, traffic control is obviously going to be device by device customizable. So as you can see here, I've got two Wi-Fi devices connected to this device, and you can find out more information about them. And of course, what their live access and connectivity is at the moment with regards to the internet going in and out, as well as generating reports if you choose to, where you can have these generated that give you a lot more real-time information about the collected devices over time. But bear in mind, things like historical reports, you're going to need to consider storage, and that's something, again, we are going to touch on later on, because it's one of the few failings of this system, and a kind of a consistent thing that Synology have been getting wrong, in my opinion, that is one of the few things that I've got to say negative about this router, but unfortunately it is still quite a meaningful thing. As mentioned earlier on, a lot of the more complex router management things, again, we already mentioned firewall, a lot of these, you can't really simplify them without making them dangerously insecure. But a lot of them are disabled by default, as you can see there. And even the auto block system, by default, is set to 10 login attempts within a time frame window. I've not adjusted that. That's the default setup there. As well as, if you choose to, block IPs historically or manually added if you choose to on the fly. Finally, operation mode is where you can decide whether this router is going to be directly connected to the internet going into your home or business. Bear in mind, if you're not running like RJ45 box type setup on the wall, a lot of in-house fiber and stuff like that is not going to directly connect. So you're still going to need some kind of physical outlet supplied by your ISP if you're not running a direct RJ45 interface. But otherwise, you can run this router behind an existing router, which you can switch to modem mode if you're concerned about the impact of those additional bandwidths flying around. But just bear in mind, by doing that, if you select wireless AP, a number of these options will disappear because these are dedicated to the router being used as a primary router device. So that's enough of the LAN and wired connections. What about the Wi-Fi? Well, Wi-Fi is a great deal more simple on here, and of course a lot of these options are still configurable within that LAN center we mentioned earlier on. But creating Wi-Fi connections, as you can see there, we've got our primary, we've got our guest network if we choose to. So for example, if we want, we can edit the guest network very, very quickly. We can say whether we want to bind it to a certain frequency of 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. If we choose to, we can adapt the security that's on that connection. So again, we can make sure it's as secure as we want, or just lower it entirely to make ease of access as straightforward as possible. Next, we can assign a schedule to it. So if you only want that guest network to be running for a brief period of time every day, or when you've got like a visitor or something, you can. And as mentioned earlier on, if you do create that portal there and enable that guest network, so if we turn it on, from there, if we choose to, what we can do is create its own kind of dedicated portal access point. So again, if you're a business running this setup, you can go ahead and, if you choose to, create a customized URL there, add its own splash screen, its own messaging system there. It's all kind of lovely and easy to create and add stuff on there. So again, if we choose to, I can go ahead into one of my folders here. Let's go into the useful files folder and just arbitrarily pick any old picture there. Let's go for it. DSM logo if we choose, that adds the DSM logo. And again, you can add other stuff like change the background image there to anything really that you choose, and then you'll create this its very own background there, nice and simple. And again, I'm not really going to go into too much detail on these, but at least it gives you the ability to add images in the background and more to that guest portal and create a lovely little bespoke area. And again, do check out that video to learn more about the guest networking setup. And again, you can bind devices if you choose there. All of this is readily available from the default setup there. And if you are adding new Wi-Fi points within the mesh network, that's really, really straightforward as well. You can add them all in a bunch or individually if you choose. And even you can, instead of connecting them wirelessly, you can add them to the system using a LAN cable connected point to point. Again, we're going into way more detail on that in this video here. Where you can, if you choose to, just connect the two devices via a LAN cable, and then it will automatically set up the wireless connectivity as well at the same time for you. So again, lots of configuration there. But when it comes down to configuring your network connections and the devices, that is where Synology Safe Access, again, is worth the price of admission. When all the devices are connecting to your system over time, that's all the wired devices, wireless, NASs, cameras, TVs, you name it. You can bind these to profiles. So to put that into perspective, here's a profile I created very quickly on the fly. I just attached one of the mobiles to it. And from there, if I choose, I can set up an internet schedule there. I can go ahead and set an access schedule there in actual time. And finally, set up individual web filters there if I choose to. And it is tremendously easy to set these things up. This is how quick it is to set these up. So we're going to create a user profile. If we chose with a client device, again, like a TV, a camera, a NAS, I can use a kind of non-human identity there for the device if I choose to. But for now, let's attach an icon there. So if we choose to, let's put Robbie in there, find an image of me, scroll down. Any image will do. We're just going to use that picture of me there. Click open. It will upload it. It will ask me to cut it down. We'll put it there. We'll give it a title. Click next. Assign it to that mobile device that's already connected on the Wi-Fi. And there you go. We've now created that identity. And then if this character here, this other Rob, comes along with other devices and I see them connected, I can then assign those devices one by one to this person's identity. And then all the rules that I create for that user, whether it is that I want to assign any kind of new devices that are on network to it or remove them, or if I want to set an internet schedule so I can say they can only access the internet on certain times of day, I can set that up within this monitor. Likewise, I can set it up that they can only have internet access for a finite amount of time every day on different days of the week. And if you've got kids that need to do homework, whilst not being able to access certain websites but still being able to access educational websites, that can all be set up thanks to the web filter, which will allow you to create different profiles or a customized profile, so a child profile here, will allow you to break down how and when they can access it, as well as the websites they can access. With Safe Search, you can force this user to only have Safe Search settings, and no matter whether they try to configure the search settings to enable adult or explicit content, this will override that connection immediately, and all of that very quickly being forced directly from the interface there. And again, you can still apply time management rules, you can apply web access rules and more, all on the fly to all of their devices. What I'm saying is, if, for example, you have a child in the house that has a mobile and a laptop, you only have to set these rules once and it will apply to all of their devices. If you set it that they can only have 3 hours of internet access a day, that is shared across those devices. If you want to make sure that their homework laptop can access websites that their phone cannot, you can do that as well. All of that accessed from this interface here, and all of it customizable on the fly. If they go to certain websites that they were blocked, you will be notified, and from there you can grant access or deny access, and this is called the inappropriate attempts monitor right here on the right hand side. And again, once you set this up for the first time, it allows you to have a much safer and controlled network environment for family members or employees in your business, all set and controlled automatically from this single user interface. This is not available, from my knowledge, to any other router system, and the only ones that I've seen that come close are paid subscription premium services, and even then they don't go into this much minutiae. Now, I could go on about SRM for a long time. The responsiveness of the interface, the configuration and the customization of the software, and indeed the control panel and the large number of options that it includes. And I really like what I see. But the last thing I want to talk about is USB access on SRM, because although I've covered it before, I want to talk about some of the good and the bad. So, what did I mean when I said I want to talk about the good and the bad? Well, I've just attached a USB device. That means that I can take advantage of FileStation there. If you do use a USB storage device, it can affect some of your Wi-Fi coverage, and you can change some of the settings there within the settings menu to kind of work around that with connected devices there. And again, you've got all the information there with regard to the storage. You can create shared folders, as well as map network drives via a lot of these featured services and options there. And again, this is NAS level access. Indeed, you can install several USB applications very easily, such as, I'm going to have to install it manually here because unfortunately at the time of recording there isn't access to these applications. But if we make our way into the Synology router there, let's go straight in, go into there, scroll up, put in WRX560 there, go to the top, there's the packages. We can make our way in and install, for example, the media server application. This will allow you to have any photos, video, music, whatever that's on this USB drive to be accessible via Synology's own media server application. And indeed, you may have noticed that USB drive, unlike a lot of routers that would just show it to you in like horrible breadcrumb fashion, this is a fully fledged file manager. You've got everything from creating archives, sharing and creating file share links, much like any of the NAS devices, copy, paste, archive, extract. Then you've got shared folder creation, you've got encryption tools, all of these things built in to an incredibly impressive file management tool there. And the same goes for installing those applications there. There's lots of tools that you can go ahead and install directly onto this router, much like they would on a NAS. So why did I say there were things I was less keen on? Well, simply that if you want to install some of the apps, such as threat prevention, such as media center and more, these all require a USB drive. You can't install them without a USB drive. Now, on the one hand, you might be thinking, so what? I'll get a USB drive. Well, that means you can't use failover because you've only got one USB port. And that's a real bummer. That single USB port there means, as mentioned earlier on in the video, I can't use a mobile dongle there. And if I use a mobile dongle, I can't use a USB drive. I've had to swap them out, which means if I want to have failover with an LTE or SIM router, there's a bunch of applications that now I can't use. This system only having one USB, much like the system only having one 2.5 GBE, is really emulated in its limitations when you go into the software. Now, it's not really going to affect everyone. That's got a niche software limitation, and not everyone's going to be hit by that. But I think a small percentage of users are going to feel the pinch on that. Again, there are lots of other features in SRM that I've barely touched on. Threat prevention, the VPN plus server application, and more. Which, again, if you check out that SRM video for an hour, you'll learn. But I think for now, this has been a nice little understanding of how this app works and what it looks like. And again, I do also recommend that you check out the mobile application DS Router, as DS Router also brings a bunch of services that allow you to configure your Synology router to almost the full degree of features and services via a mobile application. I'll add a link to all of these videos in the description, but for now, let's make our way back to the studio and summarize what we think of the Synology WRX560. So what do we think? Well, that's kind of a complex question, which I think we have to answer in a few different ways. Is this a good router? Yes. That, to me, is beyond doubt. It is a good router. It does exactly what it says it will do. It's still one of the only routers out there supporting that 5.9 gigahertz band there. It also, for its frame, has a tremendous amount of bandwidth coverage to go all the way up to like being an AX300 router. Also, the software, SRM, is still unbelievably good on this system. And again, things like safe access, some of the advanced threat detection methods on there, the profile building, the applications and utilization of the USB ports on there, the ease of use and giving you a router experience, and definitely a router GUI experience that is unparalleled anywhere else on the internet. When you look at router graphical user interfaces, be it via the mobile phone or via the desktop interface in a browser, they always fall into two categories. One, overly technical, non-graphical and jargon heavy and too technical for most people, or overly basic, simplistic, but also looking like something from about Windows 2000. It is not a great selection of router software out there. And even the look of SRM smashes those down. And then you add the features and functionality that have clearly been built around the same methodology as DSM, Synology's premium NAS software platform. SRM is incredibly good on this device. And also, the build quality is good. I like that it's 2.5 GBE. I think it is definitely a good router, but it is not perfect. There are things about it that I can't help but come away from feeling slightly ambivalent and, dare I say, disappointed. The single 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port on there, it's a swing and a miss for me. I like having the port. I don't like there's only one of them. Another thing, I don't like that there's only one USB port. That seems really odd to me. Having a USB port and only one of them means the idea of using, say, failover with a SIM related data connection, an LTE SIM, I can't use that for storage anymore. And if I use it for storage, because most people wouldn't, unless you work in a particularly large business environment, you're not going to have two wired network internet connections going in to the same location as this for them to go in there. You're going to be more likely to rely on a SIM-related data connection. So that gives up that USB port there. Also, let's talk about the price tag. This is not the cheapest router out there right now. Given that this has arrived in the same week as the Google new router that they brought out into their market, that Pro series one there, that is Wi-Fi 6E, and has arrived the same, if not cheaper, in price to this device, is something of a shock. Yes, you are paying for the software, which again is unparalleled. It brings things to the party that no one else does. But it's still not avoiding that price tag is a little bit fraught, notwithstanding its price being noticeably higher than older generation devices and even that current gen Google that we just mentioned. But on top of that, when you look at the structure of the portfolio of routers from Synology, yes, I expect this to be more expensive than this. I get that. What I'm less keen on is how close that price is to this, because this is a banging router, and right now at the time of recording you can pick it up for about 260 nicker on Amazon in the UK. I'm sure there's a link in the description, use it, etc. But for this to be 260 right now, even though obviously it's been out a little while, so the price is obviously going to be a bit fluid. And this knocking around at the 200 quid mark, that's too close, because this is an infinitely better router. It's got the same, it does everything this does, but it has tremendous coverage. It has another gigahertz band, a more high performance internal hardware, and that price tag being that similar, I find not great. But at the same time, maybe over time, after a few months of release, this will have a more dynamic price tag, and that will hopefully eliminate what I just said there if you're watching this in the future. And then really my only downsides are, again, the single 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, maybe the fact you haven't got external antennae, but I get it's about deployment there, and a single USB port. But apart from that, I really like this router. I'm not sure about the naming, the WRX560, but other than that, I do certainly recommend it, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Now, we will be doing several comparisons between this and Google's Nest Pro router very, very soon, alongside comparisons with other Synology routers and indeed the QNAP Q-Horror series, so do stay tuned for those videos. Also, before you buy, coming out on this quite soon, it's going to be a much shorter video and boiled down to the bullet points, so do stay tuned for that. If you've enjoyed this, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe. There's links in the description to the written review, alongside links to other resources to do with this router and other Synology routers as well, and buy links there to Amazon. And if you are planning to buy this router from Amazon anyway, because you can buy it anywhere, but if you do want to buy it from Amazon, please use those links. It costs you nothing, and we at NAS Compares, myself and Eddie, get a kickback, and it helps us keep doing what we do. On top of that, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares link below, and the free community support forum Ask NAS Compares. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.